Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely, and with me today is Ciara Haley, co-founder of The Gaggle, and we're once again fortunate to have with us a renowned litigator and political analyst, Robert Barnes. Robert, I mean, the last time you were with us was, I think, a few days before the election, and while you predicted that Trump would win, you gave a caveat, which is that unless the Democrats steal it, and you thought that was actually quite a high likelihood of that happening. I'm assuming that's kind of what you think has happened. But I'm now wondering what exactly is the state of play? What is the Trump strategy? I mean, yesterday we heard that the transition will commence. That, and Trump, of course, said that I have authorized this, but I'm not conceding. We're fighting the matter in the courts. What actually is Trump trying to achieve? I mean, is it a matter of not decertifying the elections? Is it a matter of uh, putting certain votes in doubt so that no one gets to 270 and then it's thrown open into the House of Representatives? Is he really just simply already launching his campaign for 2024? So, what do you think the Trump strategy is?
I think there's a bifurcated strategy in place. So there are a wide range of actors who could take remedy: governors, state legislatures, electors themselves, and of course Congress. The in terms of what is practical, normally what you would want is you would want the court to clarify or a governor to clarify that they cannot certify election results. The governorship seems to have sailed in most places, so he's going to be reliant upon courts to say that. If they don't, there's always the possibility that you have what they call faithless electors. There were some in 2016 that didn't like Hillary Clinton, who the Electoral College was actually designed for that, for people who have doubts about the election or doubts about the propriety of the winner being able to independently vote. Some states allow that, some states do not. But there's actually, it's only really a remedy on the elector. If the elector decides to vote a different way, their vote is binding, even if they can be punished by their state for so doing. Then his next remedy would be for Congress to say that there's not to have an objection. This was raised in 2000 and again in 2004 when a range of House members wanted to object to the certification either of Florida or of Ohio, as the case may be, in those two elections, but no senator joined them. And they passed a law after 1876 to make it that only there has to be a House and the Senate have to agree in objecting to certification of electors from a particular state to not accept that. Constitutionally, under the 12th Amendment and the Constitution in Article 1, the Congress has the power. In Article 2, the House has the power to basically determine the presidency by state delegation if one of the candidates has not obtained 270 or more electoral votes. The House and the Senate can decide that that didn't happen. The electors can decide that didn't happen. Courts could decide that didn't happen. Governors could decide that didn't happen. So there's a lot of political actors who have a role to play. I think the first thing the president would like to prove is what actually happened. Was it unlawful ballots that gave the margin of victory to Joe Biden in enough states constituting an electoral college majority? And the unfortunate thing is that his hurdle, is an obstacle in that respect, is both election officials and the courts are very reluctant to expose the deep problems of America's electoral system. We like to lecture the rest of the world about how elections are supposed to be run, but we ourselves refuse to abide by the standards we demand the rest of the world live by. If the things that had happened in this election happened in Russia, I have no doubt the institutional media would have been saying Putin stole it. But because the media is on Biden's side and many of the legal scholars and political scholars are on Biden's side, they've suddenly decided that American elections are pure and free, even though there's a lot of reason to doubt the outcome in this election. So I think what he would like to have is substantiation by a court or a governor or elected official that, in fact, the election outcome is in doubt in these states with such small margins due to the presence of a record number of mail-in ballots, where everybody agreed prior to this election, even the New York Times, that the greatest area of potential fraud is absentee mail-in ballots. and that whenever it increases dramatically, fraud too will increase proportionate with it. Yet supposedly we have the lowest level of fraud in the history of American presidential elections, according to the press in this election. So I think that's what he'd like, and then go to the House and they vote by state delegation. And when you vote for Congress, you know that one of the powers you give them is the ability to decide a contested presidential election. So I always liked that constitutional remedy. It kept the remedy for contested elections in the hands of the people's elected representatives and maintained the state representative nature of our government by making it by state delegation, not by majority vote. And of course, Trump would win that vote. Now, I think he's of mixed sentiments because I don't know if he wants to be handicapped by winning in that way. And so I do think what you're talking about, George, is right. The backup strategy is also in play, which is let's establish that they stole it from me this time, like Andrew Jackson in 1824, and let's use that to build real momentum and a real machine for 2024, the way Andrew Jackson built a political party only because he lost. He didn't have that. Democratic Party didn't exist in 1824. It was created to help to sort of weaponize Jacksonianism and led to a party that would maintain its political power amongst its core audience for almost 200 years. It wasn't until 2010 that Jacksonian America left the Democratic Party. So I think, frankly, Trump would be 10 times stronger 4 years from now than he would be if he got in now. So I think it's a mixed objective. At least prove that they stole it, then see if courts or Congress will give remedy. If not, so be it. Come back next time stronger with a powerful message of let's not let them steal it the next time and win outside the margin of fraud.
I saw a recent poll just posted by The Hill saying that 47% of voters would support Trump running again in 2024, which is already a massive amount, regardless of the outcome of this final few countings and recountings. But Robert, I have questions in regards to the mail-in ballot system. So I've heard quite a lot it being said that as a criticism of the Democratic Party, that the Dems used the virus to rig the system, i.e. by introducing this mail-in ballot when they obviously could, because it's seizing the moment with obvious restrictions due to people traveling, being in crowds, etc., etc. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt it was planned. Mark Elias, the Democratic lawyer at Perkins Coie, who was also infamous for laundering the campaign cash to Fusion GPS to spread this Steele dossier disinformation. I spent all spring and summer helping create this system. And it wasn't just that there would be mass mail-in balloting under the pretext of the pandemic. It was that all the safeguards associated with mail-in balloting were removed. So it used to be the case that you had to request a mail-in ballot before you could get it. In many states, they removed that restriction. Mm-hmm. In addition, the other protection was supposed to be that someone would independently witness it, who was a notary, that no one paid for your ballot, that no one saw you fill it out, that it was actually you who filled it out. They took your identification, all that. They removed that limitation in almost all of the states. The third limitation was that at least you had to hand deliver it yourself to the mailman or to the election office. Instead, even though what's called ballot harvesting here, other people picking up your ballots, is illegal in most states, they circumvented that by allowing drop boxes to be instituted all across these big urban counties, especially, but all across the states and country, really. And then last but not least, the only remaining check on ballot fraud in the absentee ballot context. And, Jimmy Carter warned about absentee ballots being an area of ballot fraud. He himself was a victim of it as a state Senate candidate when he was first getting to power in Georgia. The way Jimmy Carter got in was he brought an election contest, said the election was rigged, proved it, and that's how he got in. That's how Barack Obama got elected. He decided to challenge the signatures of all of his opponents, and over half of the signatures were rejected for all four of his opponents in Chicago. So the Democrats are not unaccustomed to the problems of signatures and absentee ballots. But even that, they threatened litigation throughout the spring and summer. So they basically watered that down to where almost nobody was really enforcing it. And to give some contrast, Democrats used the signature matches to get the Green Party off of the ballot in a bunch of key states this cycle. And they, on average, were able to strike between 20% and 50% of the signatures as invalid. Yet somehow we have the lowest signature rejection rate and lowest absentee ballot rejection rate in the history of the country in this election when absentee ballots skyrocketed.
Yeah, because I see in Pennsylvania, they have said that the mail-in ballots count even if the envelope is not completely filled out.
Correct. And then you were allowed to basically not fill it out correctly. They didn't check signatures.
Yeah.
The reason why absentee ballots are always problematic is because the whole reason for a secret ballot in a safe, secure location is that nobody can buy your vote or guaranteed to buy your vote. No one can coerce your vote. No one can blackmail you, and no one can fill in your ballot for you. All of that is gone in a mail-in ballot context. And so we created all these rules to limit the risk of that. And they didn't just allow anyone to do mail-in balloting. It was that they removed all the safeguards to prevent fraud from occurring in mail-in balloting. And it was but for the combination of those two, I have no doubt Trump would have won. But it was the reason why I said that Trump had to win outside the margin of fraud. This election is probably most analogous to 1896 when they probably didn't need to steal it from William Jennings Bryan, but they made sure they had a safety cushion just in case. And we had the same thing here. The unique thing with Trump is he's a populist outsider, challenging deep state policies, challenging institutional parties at both levels. And that made him subject to unique exposure. And the combination of the lockdowns, the mass mail-in balloting, and the extraordinary opposition of big tech, big media, and big money against him was just enough to get them within the margin of fraud, and then they could push it across the finish line.
What do you think actually happened? Do you think that Democratic officials just simply accumulated a whole bunch of ballots and then just filled them out on election night once they knew how many they needed? Is that what you think happened?
I think it was a combination. The signature match is what exposed it the easiest. I told people soon after the election, I was like, if I'm wrong, then they'll happily do a signature match audit, show that the signatures do match. And that means, hey, they just used mail-in balloting successfully to get around their enthusiasm gap problem and just organized well. I said, if I'm right, every county and state will refuse to do a signature match audit. And what's happened is every single county in every single state has refused to do a signature match audit.
I think Georgia, they're pushing it.
Yes, in fact, the Georgia Secretary of State promised me, his representatives promised me 2 weeks ago he would do it. Went out publicly, said we're going to do a recanvass and an audit and a recount at the same time. Then it never happened. And watch, you'll see that somehow Georgia never gets around to actually doing that signature match audit. Because I had high-ranking officials in Georgia tell me, Bob, if you do a signature, we've always had a signature match problem here with absentee ballots. Georgia's never really enforced the signature match rules in the audit context. Because what I knew this from third-party independent candidates, that on average, did the exact same election officials using signature match standards strike 20 to 50% of signatures as invalid. So I was wondering, how could they get down to 0.1% of 1% when it's an absentee ballot somehow, particularly when tons of people are new absentee ballots are sending it in, where your risk of error, just human error, is higher than that. And so the fact that they were scared to actually allow any observers to ever look at it. And they did this in Pennsylvania. They did this in Michigan. They did this in Georgia. They did this in Nevada. There were requests to observe it before the election. They were all denied or circumvented. There were requests after the election. All the audit requests have been denied. And even in Georgia, where they promise it, it just never seems to come about. And people are going to be able to use Open Records Act requests and FOIA requests to figure out within the next 6 months or a year or so what happened. So they're just buying time. But the president knew from the get-go, I had told people close to him that the signature matches won't match. And that if I'm right, that there's a problem here, there's a systemic problem here, that would be how. But going to George's question, the signature match just captures one piece of the fraud. In other words, that's someone who filled out the ballot who isn't the person who's the identified person. That's how dead people end up voting. That's how people who don't live there anymore end up voting. I got 2 ballots in my home in Las Vegas. The only thing stopping me from filling out that other ballot and sending it out, or just putting it in a Dropbox, and the convenience of a Dropbox is it loses chain of custody with USPS, so you can't tell who sent it back, was that theoretically they're doing a signature match, but I told everybody that the probability they're really doing a signature match is low because that Democrats need every little extra ballot they can get. But the other ways you do it is illegal ballot harvesting. One of the New York Times said one of the key risks is granny farming. You go to a bunch of nursing homes, you have an insider at the nursing homes, they gather all the ballots, they fill them out, send it back. That's another place where signature matches would catch the fraud. Well, they're finding unusual turnout patterns amongst nursing homes. So where they had somebody that was on the inside, they had 95% voter participation at that nursing home in Atlanta. You just go up a few blocks up the road to another nursing home and it's 20% voter participation rates. It's hard to commit fraud and not get caught, but it is easy to commit fraud and not have the system punish you as long as you're on the right side. And so that's kind of what happened. The other methods, I think they did do illegal ballot harvesting. I think they did. It's great. Like usually the political machines here, you give them walking around money. They pay you for your vote, but they always have to hope you vote the right way. And the only real incentive is that you are able to deliver enough votes in your precinct that the next politician pays you to deliver a certain number of votes. And that's the motivation for them to vote the right way. But absentee balloting, you get to see them fill it out. Heck, you just say, you give me the ballot, I'll fill it out, I'll put it in, you can sign, and we'll hand deliver it. And I have no doubt that happened all across the country. That's why you're seeing weird anomalies like one precinct that are the same demographics vote 10, 15% more Democratic than the neighboring precinct. That's why you're seeing Atlanta suburbs vote way more for Biden than any other suburbs anywhere else. Well, in those suburbs, that's where they're finding a nursing home, granny farming. That's where they're finding Stacey Abrams, to her credit, got a whole bunch of people registered. And under the Georgia state law, you have to list your home address. Well, it turns out that they're parking lots, and they just listed apartment 1. They're postal mail drops, and they just called it apartment number 2222. That kind of jazz. So I think it happened at a broad scale. Only some of it can be caught. My guess is it's probably somewhere around 7 to 8 million votes nationwide that were illegally cast. Now, not all of those would be fraud. Some of those are just people who didn't comply with the rules, but maybe not intentionally. But had the rules been enforced, the same rules that were available a year ago, I don't have any doubt that Trump would have won an honest vote in the election.
So
I think.
Okay, go
sorry,
ahead.
George.
No, go ahead.
I also just wanted to add that on top of there being this massive question mark beside fraud that has been committed, the other big aspect is the tech and Silicon Valley aspect of having this liberal bias towards this certain chosen candidate. I saw this talk with Robert Epstein recently, who came out saying that there's a significant liberal bias in Google search, and that himself and his team have been investigating this and have proven this now at this point in time. And he said that there'd be a shift upwards of 15 million votes to the preferred candidate, with the Google vote reminders, which were only reminding a certain section of demographic, and that this could have shifted millions of votes itself as well. And of course, that is the influence that now we all are under, which is of Silicon Valley and big tech.
Oh, exactly. It's all the things the U.S. Accuses other governments of doing, in the combination of big tech manipulation, big media suppression, and big money favoring only one side. So you had a record amount spent on behalf of Joe Biden against Trump. You had this is the first major election where the media has completely suppressed a major scandal story about one of the two major candidates right on the eve of the election. In the Hunter Biden story, and big tech helped suppress that story as well. And then the third part you mentioned, the big tech algorithmic manipulation, which Professor Epstein, who's from the left, says that could be between up to 15 million because of how bad it was this election. And there's no question. I had friends of mine that were sort of following it, family members that were even on the left, just letting me know if you were in a key area and thought to be a potential Democratic voter, then you were getting bombarded by Instagram, by Google, by Facebook, register, vote. And they'd already known from the Icelandic experiments that Facebook was kind of quasi-secretly running until an Iceland election official had it come across her Facebook page many years ago. that they could move just a 0.5% or 1% just by reminding certain groups to vote disproportionately. So I have no doubt that they had a major influence. It was one of the risks. It was the 25% risk I assigned to Trump losing was a combination of voter fraud, big media, big money, big tech influence, and the sort of residual effects of the lockdown on the pandemic, taking away his economic trump card, at least temporarily. And so and I think those combined events did in fact occur, and it explains the oddity. It was where Republicans did very well, much better than expected in the Senate, much better than expected in the House, much better than expected in state legislative races, and Trump just barely lost in all of these states. They moved the margins just enough through a combination of big money. They needed all of it. I mean, record-setting media suppression, record-setting big tech manipulation, record-setting big money spending, means of voter fraud being able to occur, even if you think it didn't occur, the means of it were at the highest level ever, and the motive couldn't be stronger. I mean, if you have a chance to remove Hitler, don't you have a moral obligation to do so? And that's where that narrative had built up about Trump, and yet still they needed bogus ballots to get over the top. I mean, and if they had confidence in the election outcome, they would welcome an audit of the vote. They would welcome an audit of the signature ballot, signature matching. They would welcome an audit of absentee ballots. They would looking at the ballots themselves, making sure there aren't weird things like ballots that are only filled out for Joe Biden and they're perfectly marked and they don't have any creases in them as if they weren't mailed, things like this. They would welcome that because they would be, this proves that we're right. This vindicates us. This justifies us, and it promotes transparent, open elections to the world. Instead, their mantra from day one has been to try to coerce Trump to concede, to suppress information. The courts won't hear evidence. The elected officials won't allow audits. So they're reinforcing all the doubts about this election, which tells me they have doubts about what an honest vote would have shown.
Well, that's the thing about this election, which is just on the face of it, it's very peculiar. We have great victories for the Republicans in the House. I mean, they almost took the House. Everyone was convinced they were going to lose the Senate. It looks like they're going to keep the Senate. None of the state houses were flipped. Trump gets, I don't know, 8 million more votes than he got last time. He's up against the weakest candidate any political party in modern times has run, and yet Trump is defeated. There's something about this that just doesn't seem right. And
there's other
without looking at all the details, you think there's something wrong here. Something doesn't make any sense.
Oh, and by historical precedent, it's like my bets managed to make money, which should not have happened with Trump losing, but it was because they were diversified across a wide range of bets, and not only House and Senate bets, but individual states. So, like historically, however Florida, Ohio, and Iowa have gone, so have Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. That didn't happen this time. However, Trump improved in Florida, where, by the way, we had a very honest vote count and no anomalies. Yet somehow he loses Georgia. The Atlanta suburbs are the only suburbs that move 15 to 16 points from 2016 towards the Democrats. No other suburbs in America, in Charlotte or in Charleston or in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, none of them move like that. So you see unusual margins from unusual locations. You'll see neighboring counties that are demographically the same. One of them is 2 or 3 points more for Trump. The other one is the opposite. That just doesn't happen. I mean, we saw 15 bellwether counties that have always voted for the winner in every single election since 1964. All 15 of them vote for Trump by big margins. And yet somehow they're no longer bellwethers. So when people say that this is he does record-setting numbers amongst Mexican-American voters along the Rio Grande and other parts, yet somehow loses Arizona and Nevada. So there are peculiarities that are difficult to explain from at least a historical context. It would be one thing if all suburban voters moved against him in even portion, and you could attribute it to that. But that didn't happen. Or if certain working class groups moved against him in equal proportion. That did not happen. How is it Youngstown flips to a Republican for the first time since 1972, but Erie becomes more Democratic? So these are places that are neighboring places that vote alike and have for 50 years, sometimes 60 years. How is it they suddenly voted apart in this election? So the only explanation is mail-in balloting, and the innocent explanation is the Democrats were just better at organizing their mail-in ballot at certain places. The less than innocent explanation is they stole a bunch of ballots in those places where they could steal them. Historically, the problem with election fraud is it's hard to commit it evenly everywhere. It's the reason why Sidney Powell's theory made no sense. They're not going to steal it evenly everywhere. You're going to have some places where you have an inside person and some places where you don't. And that's where you get anomalous outcomes. Barack Obama sort of admitted this by accident in 2008. It's like, oh, you don't understand how hard it is to steal. You have to have people at the local precinct level willing to help. What they did here is they outsourced the fraud. You didn't even need an elected official involved anymore. You just needed outsiders to commit the fraud because they could just drop off the fraudulent ballots. Heck, you could go into these drop boxes, unlock them. People did it to show it, unlock them and put in a whole bunch of different ballots. You could look at the ballots, see what the signature is, try to mimic it, and just put in a bunch of your own ballots. And that's where where would be evidence of that? You would find weird ballots that appear to be computer printed out that only mark Biden because Biden was the one they were focused on and not anyone else. So there's definitely anomalies that are difficult that in any other election in the world, our Secretary of State, the international election observers by international standards would say this was not a transparent election and has the hallmarks of fraud.
Yeah. And Robert, then if the system cannot be trusted, then clearly their system, if we feel that the system is rigged and it can't be trusted, what is next for these people who feel so hard done by? Because obviously it's quite difficult if you feel like you've been cheated to raise above those feelings and not do something drastic, for example. Like, what is the next step for the Trump supporters in particular who feel outraged that this has happened and have had their eyes open to the fraudulency that can happen under the current system? What's next? Is it electoral reform? Are people going to rise above, or is it going to break down into more chaotic kind of anarchy?
I hope it becomes constructive. Mm-hmm. So like I created a little locals board with a lawyer I do different live streams with, Vivo, called vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
He's actually done this.
He's been on the gaggle.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, Viva's great. And I created the board, and we created the board in order to provide certain information. But what I'm putting up there is what I call exemplars of state contest. So and I'm asserting no copyright. So people can go there, copy and paste. And what people don't realize is that many of them have always had the right, as just an individual voter in your state, to contest an election. And I hope tons of them do so. I would love to see these judges have to shoot down one little grandma after the next, one little ordinary person after the next, saying, I think something went wrong and I'm entitled to challenge it. And I want to see the evidence. I want to see the signatures. I want to see the hand recount. I want to see what really happened. A lot of these records are digitized. The whole point of Dominion's pitch was, hey, we're going to digitize all the ballots. So if there's ever a contest, we can show everybody in the world the ballots. Well, why hasn't that happened yet? Unless there's something weird looking in those ballots, unless some of the serial numbers are off. If you planted some ballots, where it would show up is the numbering on the ballots would have some little bit peculiar range potentially. But I would love to see that happen. So I'm putting those up there as exemplars for people to cut and paste if they want. They're just exemplars, so I'm not telling you to do something because state bars will whine about that. But I'm just giving you the opportunity to do what you want, by golly. But I hope that little d democracy is the method of reform that people use. So challenge it and contest it. Use the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Records Act and the Sunshine Laws in your individual state to get records. Find out what the communications have been about some of these issues. Find out what the signature matches look like, what the ballots look like, how the records worked. See if there's more votes than voters, as keeps happening in Detroit. Dig into it. Use that. I think there's a lot of tools out there that people didn't know are out there that they can popularly use and to democratize our elections and hopefully clean them up and make them more open, more transparent. The United States Elections Assistance Commission has a bunch of recommended protocols, best practices. The Election Integrity Project, the same. International election observers have created these rules for the world. We've imposed them to the Secretary of State before we'll recognize people from other countries being elected properly. Let's use them in our own country. And hopefully, and the second thing I would like to see is election law reform. We should really not go back to absentee ballots again en masse. There's too much risk associated with them. They should really be limited to people who just physically cannot vote by any other means. And if we're going to keep absentee balloting, let's keep all the safeguards against fraud with them. Witnessing requirements require the person to request it themselves. Make sure that the signatures actually match. Make sure the information actually matches. And have real voter ID. It's ridiculous that we're one of the only countries in the world that does we would not recognize elections in a lot of foreign nations if they didn't require voter ID, but we don't require it in some states in America. It's insane. And people call it voter suppression. That's nonsense. It's fraud suppression. That's what it is. I've represented poor people all across the country. They don't have a problem getting an ID, folks. Pretending that that's the hurdle to them voting is nonsense. It's the hurdle to somebody buying their vote or coercing their vote. That's what it is. I would like to see that happen. And then Trump use it like 1824 with Andrew Jackson. Always the weakness with Trump was there wasn't enough of a movement. It was too much about a man and too little about a movement. And he didn't have people within. He didn't staff the entire Justice Department, the courts, the State Department, all the rest with his people. We're seeing him now start to accelerate things, pull troops out, he understands who was partially behind beating him. And I hope he pays them back in kind, not only by removing our troops from some of these ridiculous places, but also, as I continue to pitch people close to him, the best revenge for Trump is to pardon Julian Assange, pardon Mr. Snowden, and pardon General Flynn as well. But
do you think the Assange pardon is likely? Do you think he'll pardon Assange?
I think it's more likely now because they stole it from him, to be honest with you. I think that had they not, he would have felt more restrained. I think the fact that you're seeing him put his own people in the Defense Department quickly, I mean, that tells you he knew what went on, because where does he move right away? Defense Department, start bringing the troops home, make Joe Biden send them back out. But no, Joe Biden's already looking at new war places. Susan Rice wants to go to Ethiopia. I was like, how could they find another place to invade? And the Democrats have already come up with it. Ethiopia.
That's it. Yeah. Forgot about that.
And you don't think, Robert, in the case of Trump, it's too little, too late, Robert?
His hurdle, legally, no. Legally, the whole process here is that you're supposed to actually wait for the certification to file the state contest. The election contests are what give you broad remedy. You don't have to worry about standing or anything else. And so on paper, legally, this is now when he should get remedy. His hurdle is the courts and Congress. These are institutions that are so diametrically opposed to him and dislike him and have been complicit in the cover-up of corrupt elections for a long time, that the last thing they want to do is show the world America's elections are a joke. And so that they can be easily defrauded at any time by 100 different mechanisms, methods, and means. They don't want people digging into I think the Sidney Powell stuff was, it was Russiagate for the right. And I'm not a favor of it at all. Machines were not the core source of the problem, though I believe we should get rid of machines and go back to paper ballots like the UK has, like Canada has. How we're behind what Canada does is beyond me. But but I think that that's his obstacle. His obstacle are the courts and Congress being institutionally opposed to him, his own judges that he appointed finding excuses to not issue relief or remedy like the Atlanta judge did. Not a surprise, because again, 2/3 of the people he appointed were McConnell people, and McConnell people want Trump gone. They would like Trump's votes to show up for Republicans down ballot, but they would like Trump not to be around anymore. And that's why what he needs. Andrew Jackson benefited by having the election stolen from him in 1824, because it forced him to build an institutional movement that, while you can complain about certain aspects of Jacksonian America in terms of African Americans and Native Americans, in terms of working class natives and a wide group of immigrants that came in between 1828 and 1860, it was one of the peak of working class prosperities in the history of this country. Jacksonian democracy was real, and for at least those populations. And the only way that happened was he was forced to build a real organization of real loyalists built to the cause and the candidate. And that's what Trump needs. And honestly, he could benefit for having the system will make a mistake by covering up the fraud that took place in this election and forcing Trump to become much stronger 4 years from now. But I think that's the likely outcome. There is still a Hail Mary chance that that the courts do the right thing and clarify what happened, and elected officials step up to the plate and Congress steps up to the plate. But it is a Hail Mary.
Which courts do you think at the moment does he have the best shot? Is it in the Third Circuit? Is it in Georgia? Where does he have the best shot at the moment?
State Supreme Courts. So the state Supreme Court in Georgia, the state Supreme Court in Michigan, the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin, all lean right and have been willing to push back. In fact, Michigan Court of Appeals had some judges issue some strong rulings today who get it. Because my pitch to people on the left has been twofold. One, many of them have been fighting machines involvement in elections for a long time. I'm like, this is a great opportunity to build a left-right coalition on election reform that they have wanted for 20 years. And their main hurdle has been Republicans historically. And my other argument to friends on the left is we want a transparent election. Let's start using the policies and procedures and protocols that we put in place over the last 20 years by the United States Election Assistance Commission, by the Election Integrity Project, to make sure we have open, transparent elections. We should have hand recounts automatic in every single time that the race is within 2 points or so, particularly for the presidency or statewide office. There's no reason. I mean, I get it costs, a couple of extra days of time, et cetera. It should be monitored. It should be observed. Signature match checks should occur. Everybody should know that the chain of custody of the ballot should be secure and made clear. All of that is what the United States Election Assistance Commission, created by Congress, recommended 15 years ago. That is what the Election Integrity Project recommended almost 10 years ago. And that was a bipartisan group. That's what the Carter Report recommended versions of in 2005. So why not utilize these procedures? I'm afraid that, again, in the Trump era, we're seeing courts start saying, if someone's committed voter fraud, you have no right to sue as a voter. They're issuing, just like they've done in a lot of Trump cases, dangerous, perilous precedents that are going to gut the ability to have meaningful civil rights and civil reform in the issue of election law, simply because they want to keep the fact of fraud from being exposed and want to keep Trump from the White House. So but the state Supreme Courts are probably his best shot. Second best shot is the U.S. Supreme Court, but that's a reach. He'll have Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, who have already voiced concerns about how this election was being conducted. The question is, where does Roberts go? Where does Kavanaugh go? Where does Barrett go? As we talked about before, I have no confidence in Barrett. I was right. She didn't get involved prior to the election, which caused a lot of this problems.
I was amazed because you absolutely had it spot on. Within days, when she had a shot, she had, actually to add her vote, she did that. Oh, I don't have time to absorb all this material. She's supposed to be the most brilliant woman who has ever stepped into a courtroom. And and she just can't possibly understand the intricacies of this argument. So I was thinking, but you got it absolutely spot on about her.
And what's amazing is the only thing in common of the federal judges who've made substantive rulings so far in election-related lawsuits, they're appointed by different presidents, one by Obama, one by Trump. But what they have in common is both of them are members of the Federalist Society. And I was telling people, it's not a shock that this elite group that's anti-democratic at its roots, that's anti-populist in its orientation, that has monopolized appointments on the right for the last 15 to 20 years, continues to undermine the ability to have any kind of democratic or populist reform movement alive in terms of its causes or its key issues. And so, yeah, it's one of the weaknesses. And it was all the weaknesses of Trump's administration have boiled down to delegating appointment or legislative power to the Republican establishment. And now it's all backfiring on them at once. But that's why it exposed the need. The real problem here wasn't Democratic corruption. Frankly, that was, as I mentioned, predictable before the election. The problem was not having a populist machine there to push back. Mm-hmm. And in positions of power, in positions of popular influence. That's why I hope he does create his own TV network. I would love to see Rupert Murdoch destroyed and his kids wrecked. Fox has no idea how vulnerable they are to being crushed overnight. If Trump creates Trump TV and brings Tucker Carlson over, that's the end of Fox. And then you would have a true independent, like what the Hugo Chavez and Putin recognized in different respects. Like all the criticism about media manipulation, all they really did was make sure there was a media presentation for their point of view. I remember I was in Venezuela. It was like 80% of the media here bashes Chavez every day. For a dictator, he has a peculiar way of manipulating the media. It's not like Cuba, where you really didn't find any public media criticizing Papa Fidel. But in the same in Russia when I was there, it's like the people were eager to bash Putin when I was around in the intellectual and professional classes, but working class people love the guy. I remember being shocked by that, the scope and scale of it. That was my introduction to it in Russia. But if you want the Russian news, it was just Putin made sure his audience he had a message and that his audience could find a message. It wasn't dominating the other channels. That's true anywhere. If you look institutionally, if you're going to have a populist reform movement, people like Huey Long built his own radio stations and wrote his own newsletter. That's the way populist movements have to take place. They have to take over, and it's clear big tech is not going to allow its platforms to continue to spread anti-establishment populist politics. So there's going to need to be, and luckily there's independent IT groups forming, but what's really needed is Trump TV would be great for a populist, anti-establishment, true network to be out there where those voters where you could help organize thoughts, design ideas, and push messaging in ways that Fox has never really done. There's nobody on the institutional media side left. I mean, when Glenn Greenwald has to even leave The Intercept to have his voice heard in an independent way, it tells you how bad the institutional press is in America.
Yes. Yes.
But Robert, the other thing that I could not understand is what happened to the other populist movement that was Bernie Sanders. What happened to his grassroots movement, which seemed to carry such momentum, such hope, particularly for like the millennial generation and my generation, such aspirations that were dashed. And where is that movement now?
It's one of the problems. I mean, I think there's several issues with Bernie. Bernie allowed it to be stolen. I mean, that's also a good contrast to where I think it's wise of Trump to contest it. And even if he ever concedes, to do the kind of concession to say, yeah, you stole it, but I'll come back later. Not do like Bernie and walk away gently into the good night, which undermined, his sort of authenticity with some part of his audience and the continuity of his message. The other problem is the Democratic Party is becoming so dependent on the professional class wing for its donations, for its candidates, for peopling its personnel and in the administration that's coming down the pipe. And now for votes, that it undermines populism. Like, I mean, with Trump, he was always going to keep losing ground in upper middle class, professional class America. That forced him to continue to expand a class-based appeal to Latinos and African Americans. That's what populism needs. Populism needs to reach over into the working, build cross-class, cross-culture, cross-race, cross-religious, class-based coalitions. And they've been part of Bernie's weakness has been that, like, the person who could have built that on the left most easily, if she had more sustainability, would have been Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
Someone that's a little more attuned on cultural issues. Like, that's where the woke revolution, it always reminds me of George Orwell, who said socialism would be great if you could just get rid of the socialists. And his point being that he wrote brilliant satire and the Road to Wigan Pier and the rest, which is where he goes into detail about the problem is, he goes, the poor people, they always smell. Oh, they smell so bad. He's imitating the professional class that sort of took over what you could call a populist left, radical left, revolutionary left. And in the end, it distorted it away from working class policies and politics into letting the state run everything. And I think that's a weakness in the left populist movement currently, is that it has too much of a professional class hue. And that it needs to have more working class roots. And it has a little bit of that by age, millennials and Zoomers. It has a little bit of that by ethnicity. But it's the woke revolution infecting it, I think, has undermined its ability to go broader, to reach wider ranges. Like, my nephew was a huge Bernie fan, but he has no interest in wokeism. And he's basically tuned out of politics for the most part. Over the past year or two. So if they need to divorce themselves from the little would-be Trotskyite revolutionaries and get some real old working class Hoffa-style laborites, and then they could build a real left populism movement. But yeah, I think right now Bernie's so old, I don't see who's going to replace him. I know AOC kind of will, but the big disappointment, Kyle Kulinski, other people, they've just embraced too much wokeism. I mean, that's why even Glenn Greenwald is being critical of it. That's why Matt Taibbi is being critical of it, saying, look, this is just not a place where you're going to build lasting working class support beyond what you have if you want to build a class-based coalition. because the professional class will not be there. The neoliberal professional class will not allow left populism to actually succeed. They're
Right.
happy to get their votes. They have no interest in delivering them in policy. We're about to see that with the cabinet choices Biden wants.
But it's very interesting with Sanders, because you remember in about 2007, he was in favor of immigration control. He said, oh, open borders, that is a policy pushed by the Kochs. He said that. He was on TV. He said, that is a policy pushed by the Kochs. It's a cheap labor, big corporate idea. And now he's gone over. He went over on that. He said, no, open borders. Everybody who comes in becomes entitled to free healthcare, free education, free housing, and so on. Well, of course, it's an absurdity. I mean, you can't have socialism and open borders. I mean, half the world is going to come over. And it was such an obvious point, and the fact that he was unable to see it, I thought it was just, it's just sank his candidacy. He just couldn't really be taken seriously anymore as a kind of left-wing populist.
Agree. The identity politics is a fuse that it fractures the populist left from any cross-class coalition, cross-race coalition. And it has to be, and that's where that he shifted from a traditional left populist view on immigration, illegal immigration especially, being a source of low-wage labor that undermines working class communities, that working class communities pay the price for, to an identity politics definition of illegal immigration. And Trump proved all of those beliefs were wrong about how you get Latino votes. He got more Mexican-American, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Venezuelan, and other Latino groups than any Republican in history by a long mile. I mean, the county named after the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, that county on the border in Texas, actually voted for Trump. 95% Mexican-American community. It's because, by the way, that if you've been here for a while, the Mexican-American groups do not want more illegal immigration because it only competes with them. Increasingly, the illegal immigration is a sort of a steam valve for Central America to get rid of possible dissidents and internal disruption. And that's why in multiple levels, I mean, that was really even true of immigration all the way back to the 1800s. It frequently was a convenient escape valve by which corrupt governments could maintain power. I mean, it's why Fidel put them all on a ship. He's like, hey, bring out the prisoners, bring out the insane, bring out everybody who doesn't like me.
The Irish were sent to Australia.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. So it was the whole. In fact, I was actually at that prison in London where they sent people to go to their. Apparently, it's a popular place for Australians. They want to see where their great granddaddy got shipped off. But yes, absolutely. That was. I mean, there's parts of that in the U.S. Georgia was started by indentured servants and other groups that were sort of dissident types that were thrown. But that's why America had such populist roots. We had the populist portion of Norwegians in America. That too, by the way, is peculiar. Trump improved amongst Norwegians in Minnesota and Wisconsin, yet somehow lost both, which has never happened, to be honest with you, for a Republican. There's just a lot of anomalies. But when if Joe Biden does a thank you tour, it should be through nursing homes, parking lots, and cemeteries, because that's who he has to thank for his election in his presidency. But I hope left populism reconsiders. It tends to atrophy when their party is in power. Right populism, there were aspects of it that were stronger because Trump kept his word, but there are aspects of it that are definitely weaker when either Bush was in the White House. So I'm curious, will left populism reactivate, seeing how Biden will not, what neoliberal politics looks like, especially what happens when we go back to war again? I mean, Obama sort of dodged a lot of bullets for going into Syria and Libya and all the rest because he was Obama. And everybody just wanted to believe the best about Obama. So the left could only partially come to terms with the fact that he was really a neoliberal in foreign policy. Right. But what happens when you have Biden doing it? I don't think Biden has Obama's immunity. So if he starts invading new countries within a year, which it looks like he's going to find an excuse to do, and I think the whole deep state is annoyed that they've had to sit on the sidelines for 4 years, and they hate what Trump did, that they want to prove they're back in charge. So I think we will be somewhere soon, particularly if he puts people like Susan Rice, Sally Yates, who's one of the most corrupt people, as a potentially attorney general, Stacey Abrams, who's helped engineer this fraudulent election in the Civil Rights Division. I mean, people that are part of a corrupted establishment that look more like the statist politicians of Eastern Europe from 1970 than they do a left populist revolution of a sort of a Huey Long or of a Bernie Sanders originalist variety from 2015.
Do you think they will try to prosecute Trump? Do you think they're going to try and go after him for one reason or another?
I think they want to threaten it in the hopes that it backs him off of getting involved in public life. If they actually escalate to doing so, I think the great weakness with our system is not so much that the moral compass is skewed, even though I believe it is amongst those who proportionately hold power in our institutions. It is that they're increasingly incompetent. They're like the people who led us into World War One. You read the books of their internal discussions. You're like, these people were just dumb. They weren't just corrupt. They were just dumb. It's what happens when the family tree doesn't branch enough. And so the Thomas Paine's view of royal power is like, when you see those kids, do you really think those kids came from God to be ruling us? Maybe not. It was just genius insight. But that's what a lot of them are. I mean, that's how you get Hillary Clinton, the thinking that things are going to be great for toppling Libya. One of the worst moral humanity disasters in world history, or at least contemporary recent history since World War II. And so I fear that their incompetency is such that they may go after him to try to prove a point, to say nobody else better ever voice anti-war, anti-establishment, populist views from the left or right, or we will punish you and prosecute you for doing so. Or we'll not only bankrupt you, but try to imprison you. But I think they underestimate the scope of his audience. I think the system was shocked that despite everything they did, they needed the margin of fraud to be the margin of victory. So I think they realize there's a depth of Trumpism that isn't going anywhere. So if they're smart, they won't do that. They will move on.
I also thought that Biden said that they won't specifically.
Yeah, Biden said he wouldn't. Problem is the Southern District of New York tends to be its own rogue actor. The New York Attorney General and the New York District Attorney Office tend to be their own actor. So I hope not. But like, for example, the New York DA's office has a race this coming up this spring. If the New York Attorney General won her position by promising to prosecute Trump, that's how she won her election in the Democratic primary. What happens if you get someone elected like that? Now, he's no longer in New York. That's why he moved out of New York and going to be living in Florida now. I hope not, but you can't put it past him, because it's just, there's a willingness in what I call the statist left to weaponize every thing of power around them. It's very much like sort of Politburo kind of politics from the 1950s Soviet Union. Yeah. I mean, it's they look at, what can I weaponize against my adversary? Because once your adversary is no longer just someone who intellectually disagrees with you, but is someone who's morally abhorrent and is Nazi-like if they ever get into a position of power, then you feel justified doing everything to them. Destroy their lives, destroy their careers, destroy their families, destroy their professions. Right. And, I just stuck my head up briefly to point out Mark Elias's corruption involving the money laundering for the Clinton campaign to help push the bogus Steele dossier. And his people were immediately calling state bars all across the country to try to get me disbarred by filing bogus ethics complaints against me. So if they're willing to do that to just me, and I'm just a little lawyer from Tennessee, then you can imagine what some of them want to see happen to Trump.
The analogy that I use is what they did to Milosevic at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He was out of power, but they still went after him in order to say, never, never, never try to defy the United States again. But of course, the trial blew up in their faces, because the moment he starts presenting a defense, suddenly, NATO and all the people he were up against looked terrible. And they realized this trial is becoming disastrous, which is why they attempted to impose an attorney on him, because it was going so badly. But even that, of course, failed, because then all the defense witnesses says, okay, well, we're not going to take part in the trial. And then they had a big embarrassment on their hands, because, wow, now we have no defense. So they returned his power to present his own case. But that's what shows. It's all very well. Oh, great, we'll put him on trial, and we're going to humiliate him. This will be Nuremberg. Then it just blows up in your face. And I think any attempt to prosecute Trump will also just blow up in their faces.
Absolutely. The loyalty to him is deep. It's been building for 20 years in the sense of a group of people in this country on the populist right side of the equation that were looking for a champion. And he first guy to keep his word on a lot of that stuff. He didn't start a new war anywhere. He did try to do something on trade. there's a lot of other stuff he could have done or could have tried to do, but in the areas where he really had carte blanche in foreign policy, he kept more of his promises than probably anyone has in a long time, and that's why that audience is and that community is so loyal to him. That's why he got more votes than anybody. I mean, assuming Biden got his votes, but than anyone ever had before. I mean, it looks like he's gonna. I predicted he would get around 74 million votes. It looks like he'll get a little more than that. And it was just Biden's unique ability to bring out the dead that really gave him a margin. But I agree, it would be a major mistake. But you look at historically, that's what they have done to populists here. You know, they went after Huey Long both with impeachment and with criminal cases. Probably the most successful populist before Trump at the sort of state level, and could have been at a national level. That's why they shot him, of course. You know, or whoever shot him purportedly. But so I think that risk is there. If we look around the world, they generally go after. You know, look at Evo Morales; he had to flee in Bolivia, and then when they have an honest election, that his party wins by a bigger margin than he had won by before. So that's, I think, the reality of it. But history suggests that they'll try to be punitive because they don't want anyone to ever be like Trump in the future. They don't want any billionaires or multimillionaires. I mean, look what they did to Ross Perot. They scared him so much that he dropped out of the race for a period of time. So the goal is to tell anyone else, if you stick your head up, you get whacked. But Trump is the kind of person not to respond to that threat, and his supporters are going to see it for exactly what it is. And so I agree. I mean, there's no evidentiary reason to go after him. But I think there is a motivation by some political actors to try to deter people from trying to do this in the future.
Just finally, Robert, can I ask you didn't lose too much with your bets, did you?
I ended up making money. So because they shut down the betting books in Ireland, and they wouldn't take my money in London, I was forced to use Predicted in the States. And Predicted caps your bet at like 850 per bet. So I had to bet like margin of victory in Florida, margin of victory in Texas, margin of victory in Ohio, margin of victory in Iowa, vote against a bunch of big popular vote margins and electoral college margins for the Democrats, bet on a bunch of Senate races and House races. And so I, amazingly made money. So my undefeated streak in elections for betting seasons will be up despite myself, because if it had been up to me, I probably would have put more money on Trump specifically just to win in London. And they didn't let me do it. And so they forced me to make money again. So I appreciate that.
I'm glad. I think our viewers will be very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, but in summary, you don't really think it, from what I'm getting the impression, you don't think that he will prevail in the courts. So you don't think Trump will prevail. It's the odds are just too high against him.
I think that the nature of our courts make it a Hail Mary to win. But the way I put it is it's a Doug Flutie Hail Mary. So it's a Boston College, Miami, 1984. So it's a better than average Hail Mary chance, but it's definitely a Hail Mary because our systems of influence our institutions are still too corrupt to acknowledge, to operate in the way they're supposed to operate lawfully and politically. But I think that in the end, it's smart for him to fight it. It's smart for him to document it, use it, and be much stronger 4 years from now. So I think that the way I've described it to people is we're in Act 2. And in Act 2, the hero faces a crisis, and it often looks doomy and gloomy. But I think Act 3 is going to be the resurrection of the hero. It just might be 4 years from now.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Robert. That was fascinating insights as always. Thank you, Ciara. A very interesting discussion. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.